Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of CUDA Education. Today, I want to cover two things in particular. One, really quickly, is just the um, presentation and Swapchain portion of this render function. So we're continuing on our compute cloth investigation, right? And for those that don't know, compute cloth is simply an application with a canvas that falls over a sphere, and then the canvas reacts to basically wrapping around the sphere, right? And you also have a wind simulation where the wind will basically affect how the sphere how the canvas reacts over the sphere. Okay, so that's it. We're clocking at over 1,000 FPS, so this makes us an A-list simulation, if you ask me. But let's not digress. All right, so pretty much all I want to do now is let's run it in the Vulkan configurator. So it runs in the Vulkan configurator. This is like NVIDIA stuff and whatever, NVIDIA and Vulkan. So we're not gonna stress about this. But for the most part, the application runs fine. Okay. But then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take out the semaphores. So remember now, presentation and swap chain stuff is related. This is all GPU stuff, right? We're not dealing with CPU at all. So if we're dealing with GPU stuff exclusively, we know that we're dealing, and we're talking about synchronization, we know that we're dealing with semaphores, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take out the semaphores for the presentation and the render. So we present to the screen and we also render or draw, right? We cannot draw on a frame. We can't draw on a frame while it's being presented to the screen. In other words, we can't draw on a frame while we're putting it up on the theater stage or on the IMAX theater screen or on your computer monitor or on your TV or whatever, right? We have to draw first, then present to the screen. And when we present to the screen, we can't be drawing on the frame, right? So you take a picture frame, a portrait, you're either drawing on the portrait or you're presenting your drawings and your works to the screen. You can't do both at the same time. So that's what these semaphores are for. Remember, this is all GPU processes, GPU stuff. So we're dealing with semaphores, but we're going to take out the semaphores, right? We're going to take out the semaphores and just have the compute and graphics semaphores. We're going to leave those in, right? But we're going to take out the presentation and the render semaphores, okay? And obviously, if we modify wait semaphores and signal semaphores, then our wait semaphore count and signal semaphore count also changes. So let us just we'll rebuild compute cloth without the render and presentation semaphores in it, and we will see if the Vulkan validation layer, if the Vulkan the Vulkan configurator complains about us not having an organized way for rendering and presenting to the screen, right? So let's launch. So we launch and we have a whole slew of errors. A lot of it is just duplications, but we'll go all the way to the top. And basically we get is waiting on that has no way to be signaled. P present info must reference a semaphore signal operation that has been submitted for execution, and any semaphore signal operation on which it depends must also be submitted for execution. Was acquired. P image indexes. VKQ present KHR. When we see this present KHR stuff, we know we're talking about lowercase vk, so we know it's important. Present KHR, we know that was acquired with a semaphore that has not since been waited on, right? So we basically, this is Vulkan speak for telling us that basically we're not doing it correctly because we don't have semaphores and stuff, and things haven't been sufficiently weighted on, and there's all kinds of you know, craziness going on because we're not doing things in an organized fashion. Okay, so let's put back in our our semaphores, right? Let's put back in our semaphores, and you know, while we wait for this to rebuild, we are also going to investigate. So so these semaphores here, the present and render, right? If we go to definition, they're actually part of the Vulkan example base. So the author of the program, basically synchronization related objects and variables. These are used to have multiple frame buffers in flight to get some CPU GPU parallelism, right? But basically these semaphores, right, as you could see here, they're part of the example base, right? So as you guys know from previous videos, this compute cloth example is part of a slew of examples, right, that you can install with tutorial number 13. Okay, so these semaphores here are reused basically for multiple examples, right? Not just the compute cloth, right? So that's kind of why, you know, this semaphore declaration is not, you know, it's not in compute cloth, it's in the Vulkan example base, right? Because all the other examples use the base. Okay, so that's why this is there. We have our rebuild, should be done by now, and then we basically get back to normal, right? This is the Vulkan and NVIDIA stuff. We're not gonna worry about that stuff, right? But we're back to normal, right? So anyway, that's one part of the equation that I wanted to discuss. The other thing that I wanted to just do an initial overview. This is a very quick video. I'm not spending all day on this one. I dropped this application into Nsight Graphics to see what happens, right? To see what it can tell us. Okay, so we know we have our we have our compute and graphics. We have our compute and our graphics. Well, we have our compute and graphics commands, right? And we manage that with the compute dot semaphores, the complete and the ready flags, right? And remember, semaphores is GPU stuff. So you have two processes on the GPU, and you submit stuff to the GPU, and you basically have rules about how these processes relate. So when you drop this into Nsight Graphics, we get this, okay? And it's basically, we're dealing with the compute cloth application, and this is the GPU trace part of the equation, right? And I thought I was a Vulkan expert. I thought I knew everything about Vulkan, but as soon as you think you know everything, then you hit up on this. Okay, and this is why I'm careful not to act like I know all the moving parts of Vulkan. Okay, it's just a lot, but we persevere and we take we learn one step at a time. Okay, so what I want to basically focus on for this video is that we sort of have our VKQ submits, right? We have our VKQ submits. Notice that we have them for the Vulkan graphics and Vulkan compute, right? So we have our VKQ submits, right? And that makes sense because we have our VKQ submit for here, for the compute stuff, and we have our VKQ submit for the graphics stuff. Okay, so we fully understand this dynamic. Okay, and then we have basically weighting done. Now it's not perfect; it doesn't line up perfectly But that's maybe just because there are two different processes going on and all of that. But notice that we have a section where the graphics is waiting, and we have a section where the compute is waiting. Now, notice that based on the timeline, right? Based on this timeline, the compute stuff is actually doing stuff first, right? And then it waits, whereas the graphic stuff waits and then it does stuff, right? Maybe it is that the what is this? VK begin render pass, right? So yeah, maybe it is that the compute stuff takes longer than just the rendering stuff, right? So this is VK command render pass and pipeline barrier. And what is this guy? Come on. Yeah, okay, but you guys catch the drift. It's not a perfect lineup, but we do compute first, and then we do graphics. We have the command buffers, things of that nature. And we just have a whole bunch of other stuff. We have GPU engine activity. So when we do this stuff, guys, I know, going into the code and stuff can be very involved and even tedious and boring at times, but we're actually doing stuff. I don't do this stuff for decoration. There's things really happening. I'm not lying to you. But you could see here, yeah, there's just a lot going on. VRAM bandwidth, engine activity, all of this stuff going on. What are the actions? I want to see what the actions are. Draw indexed. You understand? So then we have metrics. So this is Nsight Graphics. Nsight Graphics is, as you can see, it's a very cool tool. They're constantly evolving this tool. So I'm on a what is it, a RTX 4050 laptop edition GPU. Depending on what GPU you have, you'll get different things. This is the GPU trace inside of Nsight Graphics, right? So I just wanted to highlight this for today. Let's see what else we could get into. So if we go to the graphics portion, notice that let's see, draw indexed. All right, so we have the semaphores and what have you. So, I guess at some point we'll get into all of this stuff, but I just wanted to do a quick overview of what happens with Nsight Graphics. And then if we look at trace analysis, we will see a bunch of other stuff. We will see top level throughput. all of this stuff, which, you know, it's a whole nother cup of tea, guys. A whole nother cup of tea. Really interested in this GPU context. GR engine, combined graphics and compute can execute one context at a time across the entire GPU. This row shows which context is resident over time, right? And it shows a bunch of stuff, but okay. Notice that for graphics, you know, under the Q submit, there's a bunch of stuff going on, right? And then Vulkan compute, we do the Q submit, and that makes sense because again, Q submit, you know, graphics related stuff, and really interested though, because now we're getting into this Q submit, right? So I'm really interested to know that this first, I understand the submit info and I understand the fence stuff, right? But I'm really interested now to figure out this guy, the compute queue, and the general queue, right, which is the graphics related stuff, right? Because this seems to be the main, I mean, outside of the submit info, this seems to be the main thing that's driving handle to the device graphics queue that command buffers are submitted to, right? Okay, that makes sense. And then what's this? Ooh. Resources for the compute part of the example. Okay, so notice that the compute part is part of compute cloth, whereas the graphics part is part of the Vulkan example base, right? Handle to the device graphics queue that handles command buffers are submitted to, right? So again, notice that that's part of the base, but the compute stuff, I guess because we're dealing with so much computation here in this example, that you know, we have to deal with resource for the compute part of the example. Number of compute command buffers set to 1 for serialized processing or 2 for in parallel with graphics queue. I think this might have been the author of this code. The author of this code, you know, updates it fairly regularly. So the serialized and parallel processing stuff for the compute stuff might have been from a previous version of the code, right? Because I don't see an option for that at the top. Right? There used to be, I think there used to be an option. But anyway, so notice for the compute stuff, we have our semaphores ready and complete. We've seen this before. We have our fences. Yeah, this is for the actual canvas, right? The cloth, the canvas, the cloth. You know, and we could change this, and it would actually change how the cloth actually reacts, right? So this is for the cloth. But yeah, what we were here initially because we were trying to figure out where. Right. Right. Compute.q. Right. So That's all this stuff. And actually, while we're at it, so um, let's just mess around with the spring stiffness since we're already here. Okay, so we're just gonna run it. All right, so you see that we get a different behavior, right? From what we initially had, right? So we get a different behavior, but that's just the computation for how the canvas behaves, right? So this was the original, and notice that we get that. So if we do 3,000, um I don't know if that shows anything different too much, but okay, let's try 1,000. All right, so we see a difference there. Let's put this back to 2,000. Okay. But then let's change it, the radius of the sphere itself, right? So this is all computation stuff, guys. Let's see. Whoa. Let's do that again because we weren't paying attention. We were on TikTok. Why are you on TikTok, guy? Like, come on. Why are you on TikTok? Okay, so the actual sphere, even though we can't visually see it because you would have to update the actual image for the sphere, but the actual sphere is actually bigger than what the actual image for it is, right? So if we do zero point 0.5, right? If we do 0.5, what do we get? So we get we get a sphere that's smaller than the image. So you see how it basically collapses inside of the sphere. Now we can see the sphere itself. Hey guys, how you doing? You good? All right. So anyway, enough enough playing around. Let's make sure we're back at baseline so we're not confused the next time around we run. Oh, this is not baseline. Nope, this is not baseline. Baseline is 1. See, that's why we do these baselines. All right, so we're back at baseline, guys. We're back at baseline, and we get our cloth like we normally do, and our sphere. Okay. All right. Anyway, guys, this concludes this video. Tutorial number 1, if you want to install the Vulkan API on your machine. Tutorial number 13, if you want to install a bunch of examples that deal with the Vulkan API, including this one. You have to make sure we're talking a Windows machine with a Vulkan-capable GPU. This example does not require a ray tracing capable GPU, but if you want to run the ray tracing capable examples, you have to make sure your GPU is also ray tracing capable. For NVIDIA, as of today, it's the RTX series and above. I can't talk about the Intel and the AMD GPUs. Also, we messed around with Nsight Graphics, NVIDIA Nsight Graphics, which is the basically the graphics debugger for uh, um, for computer graphics, right? For Vulkan and also for DirectX. Now, this piece of software only runs on NVIDIA GPU. So if you have an Intel or AMD GPU, you will not be able to run this software, right? This software is exclusive to NVIDIA because it's created by NVIDIA, and most naturally, they're going to promote their hardware, okay? And then there's also the Vulkan configurator, which basically you get. That's how we got all the validation messages and everything. You basically get that when you install Vulkan on your machine. That is the tutorial number 1. It's a file inside of the Vulkan folder called vkconfig. And I don't actually highlight it inside of the installation, but when you install Vulkan on your machine, you get the Vulkan configurator, right? And that's where the validation layers are and all that good stuff. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. This has been CUDA Education. Start your journey in computer graphics. Get your friends to also start their journey, and you guys work together and make progress in the world and learn something new. All right, TikTok not gonna do that for you. Have a great day. Bye bye.